Welcome back to Better Than Before. I'm Tony Richards. Our special guest today is Jason Treu. He's an executive coach who works with executives, entrepreneurs, and rising stars to maximize their leadership potential and performance. He also helps them build and execute their career blueprint. He's the best-selling author of Social Wealth, a how-to guide on building extraordinary business relationships, which has sold more than 45,000 copies. He was a featured speaker at TEDx Wilmington 2017, where he debuted his breakthrough team building game, which I want to ask Jason about here in just a second. And he hosts the podcast show Executive Breakthroughs, bringing game-changing CEOs, entrepreneurs, and experts that share their breakthroughs and breakdowns. Jason and I have a whole lot in common, so I'm so glad that you're here today, Jason.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on the show and speaking to your fantastic tribe.
You bet. So I want to talk to you about Social Wealth, your outstanding book. Tell me a little bit about that. What was your inspiration for writing Social Wealth?
Essentially, all in any organization, whatever we're doing is about the relationships we have both internally and externally. And the challenge is people just don't know how to build these relationships, right? And they look at some people, for instance, that are great salespeople, and they're like, I wonder how they do this magical mystery thing of building these relationships super fast. And then there are people like introverts that are like, well, I wish I could have great conversations that are meaningful with people, but I hate small talk. And there's just a lot of other people with objections and challenges. And so they're living essentially really small lives. And I wanted to make a blueprint. Instead of writing a 300-page book about all these stories, I wanted to give someone an actionable handbook they could go through and they could get results really quickly, right? And it would be 150 pages or less of just real-world advice, how to step by step, that if they followed the recipe, put it in the bowl, mixed it, they'd come out with great chocolate chip cookies, rather than trying to, 30%, action and 70% marketing and sales in it. So that was really the inspiration behind it, because I've realized in my own life, like having great relationships has been something I've been really fortunate to have and learn how to do, but it's been a significant trial and error. And I was looking at all the other books that I was reading, I had to piece together all this information, right? I didn't find it in any central place. And I found that to be exasperating and really difficult. And I wanted to call all this information in one place so people could have it and understand what they need to do. Because a big piece of relationships is a numbers game, right? I mean, you have to meet enough people to figure out the types of people you interact with best. And if you only interact with a few people, you're most likely settling in your relationships because those people may not be the best people. They're the only ones you have available.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what's the story behind your executive coaching practice? How did you get drawn into that particular profession?
I was fortunate in Silicon Valley that when I went out there, I was at the gold rush and I was just able to work with a lot of great people. I got to work with Steve Jobs, with Reed Hastings, the current CEO of Netflix, just tons of other really significant individuals and great leaders and managers. And I got to learn from a lot of these people and see the things they did well and a lot of the mistakes along the way. And for me, human behavior, trying to figure things out and bring out the best in people was just something that I'm extremely passionate and I'm curious about what I'm really good at doing. And I decided at some point in my corporate career to do a side hustle, and then eventually just turned it into something that I was doing full time because it's what I love to do. And it's not really work. It's something that I just enjoy doing.
You bet. And so I purposefully left out the name of your team building game because I wanted to let you tell us all about that. So what's the card game about?
Originally I did a TED Talk, and one of the things about TED Talks is there's few how-to speeches, right? But the problem, again, it's the same way with the book, right? It's like, how do I make it actionable and how do I make it real? And I came across this research study by Professor Arthur Aaron, and he was trying to build interpersonal closeness between complete strangers. And so he got 54 grad students together to sit across the table that didn't know each other and ask 36 questions over 45 minutes. And these were very vulnerable questions. And what happened is 30% of the people rated their relationship as the closest relationship of their life at the end of 45 minutes. And it's been replicated dozens and dozens of times with hundreds of people in different geographies. And I thought to myself, well, if I could apply this to teams, it could be game changing for the people I'm coaching and managing. Because the key thing is, if you can build trust with being people at an extreme level, you can get engagement 8 times as higher and massive productivity gains, right? And how do you do that quickly in minutes? Because the average person, it takes them anywhere between 200 to 400 hours to build extreme trust and a close relationship with someone. So if you could do that in minutes, it'd be breaking the trust curve. It'd be game changing. And so I decided to try it out and get it in front of people and create a game that would ask questions that the only people that would know it would be people in your inner circle. But you share it with complete strangers or people on your team or customers or prospects or whatever they might be. And you could fundamentally change the relationship and get inside of the head of the top 1% business people and see exactly how they're doing. And so that's what you do. You just play it in a group. You ask questions such as, what's the most important lesson you've learned in the last year, right? Who's your personal hero and why, and things of that nature. And everyone just answers the question. And it brings people incredibly close and builds tremendous amount of trust. And it's pretty game changing for people that go ahead and do it. Because at the end of the day, it's the words we use that matter more even than our actions. Because if everyone who gets married has to say, I do. Now, walking down the altar doesn't matter, right? If you don't tell someone I love you, the relationship will always be in doubt. So, in fact, really, words matter more than actions. And so you have to share with people. And how you skyrocket trust is through vulnerable sharing. And that's really the number one way. And it's really the only way. Everything else is secondary that you do in a team building or team environment. And people just forget about this and they skip this part of it. And then they have teams that are underperforming.
So the name of the game is
Cards Against Mundanity.
Yes, and is that a play on the Cards Against Humanity game?
Yeah, it is, right? When I was doing this, I asked a lot of smart people what they would name it, and they thought people came up with that name or pretty similar ones as one they would go with, and I was like, well, smart people are telling me this, then I should go ahead and name it. So I have a free version that you can get at cardsagainstmundanity.com, and then there's a paid version, which is I just created physical playing cards because people kept asking me for it. Is there a card deck I could use rather than a PDF? And so, that's available for people too.
Yes, my team is chomping at the bit to get a copy of the game. So I'm sure we're going to be playing Cards Against Mundanity here pretty soon.
Yep, you'll enjoy it, and so will everyone else. And what's really interesting is, so when I do this as a speech, I have 7 questions I use, and I've asked tens of thousands of people so far. Could anyone in your team answer all 7 of these questions and know the answers you said? And no one's ever raised their hand. And then I ask a question, does anyone in your personal life, could they answer all 7 of these questions? And a few people have, and I've gone up to them afterwards and I said, I will give you free coaching for the rest of your life every single month, once a month, if we call that person and they can answer those 7 questions. And of course, no one never answered back. So that's what's really interesting about it, right? We really don't know anything about the people we're around, and they don't really know our experiences. And that causes the most distrust and why people miscommunicate and are misunderstood. It's because they don't know critical information about us, about our past experience that help to connect the dots and how best to interact, serve information to us, support us, argue with us, apologize, etc.
Yeah, the 2 ways you get to know people is over time, which takes a while, and through mistakes, which are often painful, right? We learn, by doing wrong things. And then after enough time goes by, we finally learn a lot about people. So this would definitely speed up the process, I would think.
Yes. Yeah, it sets up considerably. And whenever I'm doing team conflict work, which is interesting because I'm getting more and more of them, I start off this because it helps people share in a group to see that a lot of their problems and prejudices and biases stem from things about the other person that they don't understand that actually have deeply affected the other person and made them on guard or really closed off or other things, and not because they don't like the other person or they're out to get them, but of other challenges they're having in their own life and the things that have gone on, right? So I think they're really helpful for people to get that insight Because like you said, I mean, we live in an agile world, right? We don't live back in 1960 where people were working with each other for 20, 30, 40 years. We don't have the luxury of time. Time is actually working against us. So the people that can shorten this curve will maximize their performance and competitiveness versus other people, regardless of what other product, service, or even size of organization that they have, right? It's about the team and how they work together, which is all the data, which shows you how competitive they are in the marketplace, right? Google's Project Aristotle, people want to look that up, shows that the number one factor is psychological safety for high performance. It's not individual performance or being an all-star person.
So, Jason, you mentioned a couple of words there that tie into this path I want to go down: conflict, working together, performance, which leads me to the topic of culture. So, I'm sure you're drawing on some of your experiences. You worked in some high performance cultures in Silicon Valley, and you've coached some people that have created some high performance culture. What's a key concept to understand about creating a high performance culture in an organization?
Well, I think first you have to create extreme trust with people, right? Trust is the fundamental building block that people skip over. And how you think about extreme trust is on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 would be, I absolutely distrust you. 5 would be extreme trust. If it's not a 5, it's essentially a 0. So that's step 1. Step 2 is you've got to create a psychologically safe environment where people can speak up, share their opinions, give feedback, right? Don't have to be perfect. I mean, all of these things are required because a lot of it's trial and error. And sure, there has to be accountability, but if you don't allow people to be themselves and bring out the best in each other, which usually happens because they're living either in a culture of fear or of being perfect or of measured on some straight metrics without really understanding what's behind it, you then create a fragmented team, right? And then culture overall that underperforms.
And trust is can be a little bit fuzzy, or sort of feeling oriented. How do you coach people or instruct people on building trust?
Well, I think how you have to do it is the same thing that's done in the game, is that you really have to understand people's experiences. So there's one way of doing it through the game, which I think is helpful to understand it. And there's a lot of questions you can use. The second way is developing a user manual for yourself and other people by asking questions, right? Like, what's the best way to communicate with you? How do you like to be approached with difficult information? What are your pet peeves? What are the best time of day to bring you information, right? And a whole host of other questions. So people essentially give you the user manual on how to interact with them exactly out of their words and out of their mouth, right? And you can do it by interviewing people, or you can do it by writing it down and then going in and reviewing it with those individuals on your team. And that will be your manager or anyone else, right? And that creates less confusion because the problem is, like you mentioned before, what happens is someone goes in a team, right? And then they have to try to figure all this out by trial and error, right? They have to guess and hope they have it right and interpret it. And that causes massive rifts and conflicts because we make up stories and false narratives about other people, especially ones that we don't feel like exactly agree with us or aren't of the same mold we are, right? And then that creates all these other issues, right? And then hurt feelings and misinterpretations instead of actually asking someone, how do you approach it? How do you do this, right? And like, what's the best way? How does someone rebuild trust with you, right? And then I find that like those two things are a huge step in creating, right, building trust with people, which then, there's the other steps and other things you can start to get to much easier, but you can't do that if you don't learn how to crawl. You can't learn how to walk and then run.
Great. How about blind spots? Let's talk about leaders and their blind spots. How can leaders, first of all, discover where they might have a blind spot? And then once they've identified it, how can they begin to close that blind spot window somewhat and replace that with a better habit or a better skill set or a better awareness?
Right. I mean, I think that that's, along with teamwork, right, and team building, I mean, self awareness are the top two soft skills out there. And they're the least understood, right? And people don't invest the least amount of time in them, also, right? Because the data is 95% of people think they're self aware, but only 10 to 15% are. And it's worse the higher up you get because no one's giving you feedback. So the couple things that you can do, one is you have to create an environment and seek out feedback from other people and ask them questions, right? Such as, what are things that I'm doing great, right? What are things I could be doing better or more of? Or what things should I be doing less of, right? What things do you think are crippling me? And to seek that information out, because the problem is when doing 360 reviews, because I've seen thousands of them and very few people use them, probably in the single digits in organizations that actually are effective. In fact, they usually make problems worse, is that you're getting feedback from other people and you get defensive. But if you seek it out, you're not, because it's something that's going to help you and you can ask follow-up questions for clarity in front of them, and people will be much more candid with you too about what's really going on. The second thing is really understanding the patterns that are driving you, right, and your blind spots. And most of these patterns are starting, coming from things that happened in childhood or some trauma or something else, right? So for instance, like a common problem is being a poor listener. And what happens is, for instance, I've had people who've grown up in households that have had a lot of kids or family members, right? So what happens is they have to scream over everyone to get heard or fight through it to get mom and dad's attention and to get them to do something. So early on, they learned that listening doesn't help them. In fact, it won't get them what they want. And it's usually at some point or other in their career, it's been helpful for them to get them to wherever they're currently at. But now they're in a leadership position and they have to listen to other people. They have to get feedback. They have to build consensus, get buy in, get to know people. Well, they're really poor at that because their whole life they haven't been doing it. So you have to go back and understand these patterns and things that have been going on, because essentially they're creating their ceiling for them. Because if they don't get over that, they're going to be sabotage their career because they won't be able to go any higher. In fact, people will rebel and leave them, and they'll probably get fired or they'll underperform significantly, and they'll never know why. And they won't figure it out because they'll attribute it to other things. Like people come and tell me and say, well, the team isn't doing as well. They can't communicate. They're not working hard enough, whatever it is. So it really comes back from seeking feedback and looking at your patterns. And the last thing you can do is start asking more what questions and why. Instead of why is this happening to me, what caused this to occur, right? And start to dig for the root cause analysis.
So I'm sure there are a lot of people who are listening right now who are saying, "Oh my gosh, that's me. I have that. I grew up like that. That's manifesting itself in my career right now." What actions can this person take to really nail those patterns down, and then what can they do to reverse that nosedive that they may be in?
Well, I think one of the things that you can start to do is start asking yourself questions of, and I go through this pretty quickly. What I call anatomy of change is, one, ask yourself, like, what are the stories I'm making up about whatever's going on, right? What are the external stories? Like in an issue where it's a New Year's resolution, right? And you want to get in better shape. Well, the stories you're making up is, I can't get to the gym because my family's putting restraints on me. I can't eat well because I don't have time to cook, right? And then you look at the next stage is looking at what negative emotions are unfelt, right, that are causing it, right? You might come up with sadness, shame, guilt, whatever first comes to mind, because that'll help you start to tap into what it is you're feeling. Then you got to look the next level down is whatever limiting beliefs that you have about yourself, right? And I look at them in two ways. One is, I'm not enough. What don't you feel enough of? And then the second one is the question of, who do I think I am? Imposter syndrome. And who do I think I am, right? That I could ever lose weight or get in better shape, and really get brutally honest. And then the last question is to ask yourself, all right, when's the first time I remember feeling like this, right? With all of those things we talked about, what's the first time I ever feeling like this? Because then you could start to trace back what was the trigger and when did this first happen, right? Because that will help you reverse it back up the stack once you realize what is the root cause. And these are hard to do by yourself, but you need to do a level of self-inquiry and looking in your accountability mirror in it, right? And then again, you can start asking questions and find 5 or 7 people to seek feedback from that are, people that are your colleagues, people you report into, people that are customers, people, anyone else external, and start asking them about, what skills do I do well? What do you think that I need to work on or could get better? What's one area if I don't get better on that you think will really haunt me, right? And get brutally honest and get some questions and start getting some feedback from people and just tell them, look, if you don't tell me, I can't get any better. And I need you to be brutally candid with me. I can take the feedback. I just can't take the silence because I can't solve it in my own head. The voices in my head aren't helping me. So I need you to help me. And you got to start somewhere, right? And I think if you do this, and essentially at some point you're going to have to get some outside help because our brain is organized around survival. It's not around thriving. So you can't solve these things all by yourself, unfortunately. It's just not how we're made. That's not a ploy for coaching. That's just the way that it just goes.
Sounds like a good reason for it, though.
It is. It's a great reason for it, right? I mean, honestly, the number one challenge every person I work with is self-awareness, right? And it just change happens from the inside out. And I used to do it the opposite way, right? I used to go in and tell people, well, tell me about what's going on with your team or whatever, even issues with team conflicts, right? Instead of going and trying to bring people together right away, what I do is I'll actually start doing my team building game so they can hear each other's answers, so they can actually hear the patterns. And then next, I'll work with them one-on-one and talk about their blind spots and work on all that. And then I'll bring them together because then they can have a much more candid conversation about what's going on internally, and they can give words to their thoughts and explain what's going on to the other person. And then it's a game changer in resolving conflicts and building tighter teams. So it's a key component for whatever it is that we do.
Just a fantastic job today, Jason, of sharing great information, great concepts. Everybody should get your book, Social Wealth. Man, you're a good friend. Thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Receive weekly coaching tips from Tony Richards, delivered straight to your inbox. Whether you're a CEO or an entrepreneur, Tony can help you reach your goals and give you a competitive edge within your industry. Tony's Monday Morning Coaching Memo covers topics ranging from leadership development to teamwork to company culture and more. Text the word leadership to 38470 to sign up for Tony's Monday Morning Coaching Memo, or sign up online at clearvisiondevelopment.com.